In this video, we're going to look at the Gradient tool and the different options that we have available using that. We'll also look briefly at the Paint Bucket tool as well. So the Gradient tool gives us the ability to create gradients, which is basically a transition from one color to another or through multiple colors. And you'll notice that with the Gradient tool selected, the toolbar across the top gives us a lot of different options, including choices of colors. These are defaults that are installed with Photoshop. We also have the ability to apply different kinds of gradients. The linear gradient is basically just a straight blend from one color to the other. Our other choices include radial gradients that extend from the middle outward in a circle. Next we have the angle gradient, which kind of spins your color in the form of what you would consider like a clock, okay? And I'm going to show you examples of these in a minute. Next we have this gradient here, which is a reflected gradient, and it's what you would imagine, where you have the foreground color is in the center and the background color is on the outside, both up and down, both on the top and bottom. And then last but not least, we have the diamond gradient, which is very similar to the radial gradient, except that instead of it forming a circle with your color pattern, it forms a diamond-shaped pattern. We also have all the typical blending modes, so you can apply the gradient in a number of different ways. You can also control opacity, reverse the direction of the colors. Dither and transparency Dither controls the smoothness of the gradient from one color to the other. Transparency controls if you are not using a color and one of the colors, quote unquote, is transparent, as you'll see here in this second option here. Having transparency checked allows you to actually apply that. If you uncheck it, it'll just keep it a solid. So let's take a look at the colors here, for instance, with the gradient editor. You'll notice I brought this up just by double clicking on the colors. With the gradient editor here, we have a lot of control. We have gradient type, solid, and noise. 99.9% of the time you're going to use solid, and you'll notice that by default it goes from foreground to background color. Okay, but we also have the ability to change these colors. So if I click on the point here to the far left, you'll notice that it's showing the green color, which is our foreground color. If I click on that, I can choose any other color. Okay, we could change it to this color here, and now the gradient changes from what it was, green to black, to this purple to black now. And same with this color. I can click on that, choose our color, and maybe have it go to this green. And so now this is our color gradient. You can also control position just by left mouse clicking and dragging the marker. Essentially what will happen is that everything in this case to the left of the marker will be a solid version of this color. Everything to the right of the marker will blend into the second color. You'll notice a smaller marker here. This is the color's midpoint, which basically means that right now, with it being in the exact middle, let me just reset this. With it being in the exact middle, that tells you that the color is going to blend evenly from the color on the left to the color on the right. But if I move this, left mouse click and drag it, you'll see the location is changing down here. So I could type in a numeric value as well, say 75%. Now the blending of the color from one to the other is going to be more stretched out between these first 2 points than the second 2 points. So you can actually use this positioning to achieve some pretty interesting effects. Another thing that I want to point out here with the gradient tool is that you can actually add additional colors into the mix. Just by clicking, it'll add a new color and a new center point. And so then I can change that color to whatever I want. Let's say we want it to be like a light yellow. So now we have 3 colors. You can also control how these colors interact. I can add a second color here as well and sample, say, from the green. Or we can use a different color. And you can use this approach to achieve some pretty interesting effects. I'll show you what I mean here in a minute. So because these two stop points are close together, I can actually create a very sharp line from one color to the other so that there's no blending. The further I move it to the left, the more of a blend there is to the right. And so there's some applications where you may need that kind of an effect. Like if you're trying to mimic reflections of metal, for instance, is a great example. Now let's say that you've added these color stops in here and you decide, you know what, I don't know that I like these. You can click the delete button, or you can left mouse click and just drag down and it'll instantly remove it. Okay, so you have a lot of control over how these interact. And so like we could change this color again to maybe something a little brighter and lighter. And you'll notice that you can see the difference in real time. So, you know, if you want a certain effect, you can just pay attention to the gradient here and it'll show you the end result. And then once you have the color the way you like it, perhaps you may want to use this in future options. You can save this as a part of your presets just by clicking the save, or create a new one, add a name, you know, so on and so forth. But certainly if this is the color you want to use in the application that you're working in or the design you're working in, just click OK. And so now with the gradient selected, let's just go to the linear gradient, and I'm going to apply it just by left mouse clicking and dragging to the bottom right corner. And you'll notice that it applies this gradient evenly from the left corner to the right corner. So you can determine direction. Okay. The first point is always going to be the point on the left. You can also apply it in selection. So if you choose the marquee tool and make a selection, we could create a new layer and just select our blend tool again and apply it, say, left to right. And by the way, if you hold the shift key down, it limits the direction, so that if I release the shift key, you notice I can put it in at any angle. If I hold the shift key down, it forces it to go straight. You can also force it to a 45-degree angle or to a vertical. Okay. Another option, of course, that we have, let's turn this off, is to use the radial gradient. And basically how it works, usually you want to have a center point, and then from that center, click and drag. You can reverse these just by clicking reverse. And so now you get that effect. Now you contrast that by the next option. If I were to click in the center and drag to the corner, it creates a gradient like this, and it's very much like a clock. As you notice, there's a very strong line there, and from that edge it rotates the color around to that leading edge again. And then we also have the reflective gradient. So again, I'm going to left mouse click in the middle and drag. And so you'll notice now we have a reflection. The foreground, or the bright color to the left, is in the middle, and then it blends out in both directions evenly to the purple. And last but not least, we have our diamond gradient, and I'm going to just click and drag, and so you can see there it creates a diamond shape from the gradient itself. Okay, so as you would imagine, this effect using these gradients can be applied in a lot of different ways. And of course, you can play around with subtlety. I mean, we're using kind of extreme colors, but more times than not, you're going to simply just use the foreground and background color. So if I highlight this particular layer again and lock it, I can apply Actually, let's go with the linear blend. I can apply this new gradient just to the box because I have that layer locked and I selected this color. Okay, just the foreground and background. But you'll notice that there's also a preset that's just foreground to transparent. And I'll show you where that can be very helpful to use. First of all, let's turn off this box. And I'm going to change the foreground color to black. And let's turn off reverse. So in this particular case, let's say that I wanted to add some black to this overall design, but not affect the rest of the design. So with foreground to transparent, if I click and drag, just say part way down, you don't have to go the whole way down, but say part way down, it actually adds a hint of the black right in here, but not to the rest of the image. The rest of the image is transparent. If I had selected foreground and background, then those colors would have been applied throughout. So it definitely gives you some flexibility to make changes. And of course, like I mentioned, there are some presets, and you can adjust these presets. If you like the copper, for instance, you know, we can just apply that, and you can really apply it to any angle. I just keep going corner to corner, but you know, you can apply that for effect, and you know, even use that same blend in different directions to create unusual looking, you know, effects if you want to create backgrounds and some of those kinds of things. So the blend is very straightforward. It's something you can have a lot of fun experimenting with, but it also is very applicable in a lot of design methods, especially if you're creating backgrounds for book covers, for header graphics on websites and those kinds of things. Gradients can come in handy very quickly. You can also use them in a much smaller scale. Like for instance, let's say that we wanted to create a button. I could make a round circle like this, and let's go with, I'm just going to sample the green that we already have and create a slightly darker version of it. And then I'm going to apply that blend, which is very subtle, to this oval. Okay. Next, I'm going to contract this selection by, say, maybe 3 pixels. And I'm going to apply the blend the other way. So whenever I deselect that, you notice that I have the foundations of a button. So it's a very quick and easy way, just simply by using gradients, to actually create interactive graphics that you can use on websites and all of that. Let's just fill this background to white so you can see the button more clearly here. Okay, and I could actually, let me create that selection. We could actually make the reduction much more. Let's just contract this, say, by 7. And we're going to repick our color samples again. And this time I'm going to make it a little more pronounced, actually. Just a little. And so you'll notice that the last time we applied the gradient, we went dark to light. So I'm going to do the reverse again. So you'll see, just by applying gradients and contracting your selection, you can get some really interesting looking 3D effects. Another thing that you can do, just to kind of add some interesting dimensionality to it all, is let's take our existing button here. I'm going to lock the layer. We'll choose our elliptical marquee tool, and I'm just going to draw a selection like this. And remember, we've worked with levels before. I'm going to hide this, Control L or Control H or Command H, and then Control or Command L to bring up levels. And watch what happens when I start moving the highlight shadow or slider to the left. Notice how it's lightening this part of our button. So now we're creating almost like a mirror effect on the button. So just by simply using gradients and adjusting levels slightly, we've been able to create a pretty cool looking little button. And this can be applied to really any shape. This method that I've been showing you here will apply to any shape. The last thing that I want to point out here is the paint bucket tool. And the paint bucket tool works very straightforward. It essentially applies whatever color you have selected, let's just pick a red, to wherever you click. And you can control how much the paint applies using tolerance. Okay, so right now, if we set the tolerance, say, to 10 pixels, wherever I click, it would apply that color to every pixel within a range of 10 of that shading. So if I click over here, so now you can see it applies that color just to that small area based on 10 pixels. Let me hit undo and change that range to 50 and click in the same general area. Now it's applying to a much wider area. If I change this to 100, it's going to keep expanding. Now let's see a different application for that. Remember our picture of Dexter here. Let's change our tolerance back to 50 and say we want to make his hair red. With the paint bucket tool selected and the color chosen, I can just click on his hair and it'll automatically fill with that color. Now you'll notice that there's a tiny little bit of fringing that's happening there in the curl area of his hair, and that's because of the tolerance range that I have. If I increase that to 100, it'll actually get rid of that. Okay, so then I could also do the same thing with his hands, but you really want to be careful with the tolerance, because you'll notice how it actually bled into the black. Alright, so if I drop the tolerance down to, say, 50, it's going to be much closer to what it should be. If I change it to 30, you'll notice that it's actually filled pretty well, except for that one little corner there, and I can go back and click that to fill that. So that's really the down and dirty of the paint bucket. It's pretty straightforward from a usage perspective.